incredibly, I'm excited for today. There's actually only one thing that's going to be able to help me do this. So hungry.
How can I help you today?
Hey, g'day. Too good. Thanks, mate. Sticky hands. Do you find the church, God, Christianity just this resistible thing? Well, if that's the case, you've come at a great time in our current conversation of reclaiming irresistible. So we just recognize when the early church movement first started, that followers of Jesus, there was just something about them that was just irresistible. And so we want to reclaim that. And specifically in our conversation today, we want to reclaim that for the next generation. One of the crazy things about the Christian faith is that in its very beginnings, and this is what we've been talking about in the last couple of episodes of Beyond at Home, its very beginnings, when the early church movement first started, it was something that was irresistible. Followers of Jesus were irresistible. So how can we possibly reclaim that when there's just such resistance? If you look at the church today, the church seems to somehow be like the number one barrier to people actually having experience or stepping into a relationship with Jesus. Maybe you resonate with that as someone who is a follower of Jesus, or even someone who's unchurched, de-churched, has never actually opted into the church thing ever because of your experience with the church or with Christians before. Well, this is something that the early church wrestled with so much, and particularly with two of their leaders, right? Their names was Paul and Barnabas. And Paul and Barnabas, they were in a part of the world or in a place called Antioch. You can actually visit this place today. And when they were in Antioch, they had a lot of Jewish people, Jewish leaders come before them and say, hey, you can't be a follower of Jesus. You can't be a follower of Jesus unless you're circumcised, unless you're following Jewish law. Circumcision for the men, right? There's a bit of surgery involved. Paul and Barnabas, they were just like, nah, this isn't the Christian faith. It needs to be as accessible as possible. This is just another roadblock. See, they held on to the fact that you don't need to behave your way into following Jesus. You don't need to do these things to become a follower of Jesus. More so, you follow your way in to following Jesus. So Paul and Barnabas, in this heated discussion that they were kind of having with these Jewish people, the leaders of the early church in Antioch at that time, they were like, Paul, Barnabas, we're going to send you out to Jerusalem, to the council, right? They're going to the big dogs, the head honchos, to the council to have a conversation around what it actually looks like to be a follower of Jesus. And the thing is that it would have been so cool to be in this meeting because the minutes that would have been taken would have been awesome. This is a heated exchange that Paul and Barney were walking into. So Paul and Barney, they arrive in Jerusalem. Right, they start having this conversation in the council, and then some of the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they stand up. And this is what we read about in a part of the Bible called Acts. This is Acts 15, verse 5. We see that the Pharisees stood up and they insisted that the Gentile converts, right, so those who had become believers who weren't Jewish, the Gentile converts, they were saying must be circumcised and required to follow the law of Moses. This is the same argument they were having back in Antioch. And Paul and Barney are just like, oh, it's the same thing. What we see in this conversation, I think it's just so cool and it's so interesting, it's so unique. In this conversation that took place in the council, even way back, centuries and centuries and centuries ago, is that there were still followers of Jesus and Christians trying to add things to the Christian faith that was just going to make it so resistible. That even way back in the early days when the church first started, that there was followers of Jesus trying to take the old and bring it in to the future, into the next generations. You see, there was one leader, his name was Peter, and you read about Peter heaps across that second part of the Bible known as the New Testament. And Peter, he actually stood up and he said, brothers, you all know that God chose me from among you some time ago to preach, okay, to share this message of hope with the Gentiles so that they could hear this good news and believe. And then Peter comes forward and he says, so why are you now challenging God by burdening the Gentile believers? Why are you challenging God by making it so difficult, by creating such a resistible faith that doesn't point back to who Jesus is? See, Jesus, he was someone who was irresistible. Followers of Jesus were meant to be irresistible. And this is where this whole thing by Peter, this was his big challenge. He's like, why are you making it so hard for the next generations to come after us to actually experience a relationship with Jesus? You see, circumcision, this thing that the Pharisees, religious leaders were holding onto so much because it was part of Jewish tradition and customs and law. So they held onto it so much because it was a physical sign of transformation. Whereas in Jesus, in the new covenant that we've talked about in the last couple of episodes of Beyond at Home, in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, he actually said, no, this is an internal transformation. There's no need for this. Peter's saying, why are you adding this onto a faith that's already so irresistible? What's the point? See, it's such an interesting conversation that takes place in this Council of Jerusalem. And what's even more interesting, even more cooler, is how this council meeting is wrapped up and concluded by another head honcho in the council. In fact, this guy was actually the brother of Jesus, and his name is James. So James, Jesus' brother, right? The guy throughout his whole life was even like, oh, this is my brother, saying that he's also God. This is a bit of a crazy thing. It was through his life, death, and resurrection that he finally came to grapple with the fact that, okay, this must be real. James gives us this beautiful conclusion to this meeting. James says this, he said, "It is my judgment, and so my judgment is that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles, for these new believers who are turning to God." That we should not make it difficult. See, James realized that the more the Jesus movement looks like Jesus, the more irresistible it will be. James realized that in the world that they were living in that time, or in the world that we're living in today, in the culture of things, that it's already difficult enough. There's already so many barriers in place that make things so resistible. See, the early church leaders, they even recognize, followers of Jesus recognizes that this can be more simple, that this can be done in a way where followers of Jesus can actually model Jesus' love through pointing people back to who he is, through how they love, through how they speak, through how they use their words, their actions, through their generosity. So what does that look like for us? How can we go about reclaiming irresistible? Well, there's a couple of thoughts that I have that I think will invite you to be part of exactly what James is talking about. You see, the Christian faith wasn't just built on doctrine and information. It was built on application. Like, the Christian faith begs the question of, how do I apply this to my life? And I think this is such a big thing, right? When it comes to reclaiming irresistible, it's what makes our lives irresistible. It isn't something that we believe in, it's something that we do. And we wanted to extend to you an opportunity to be part of reclaiming irresistible. If you're a follower of Jesus, like, this is part of who we are. Like, yes, Jesus actually sets the bar really high when he talks about, hey, this is what it looks like to follow me. It's not, hey, believe your way in. It's not, here's the recipe, here's the instructions. It's actually like following Jesus. And there's a high kind of bar put on that. But at the same time, he makes it so clear that this is actually about what you do. It's about what we do. It's about how you apply your faith. And not for a moment should we hesitate to actually exercise our faith muscle, particularly when it comes to reclaiming irresistible for the next generation. For the next generation that's already grown up in a global pandemic, but also was already struck by an anxiety pandemic, was already hit by a loneliness epidemic. We want to be part of being for the next generation. There's so many things that the church is known for in terms of what we're against or who we're against. There's so many people who've had an experience of church that just leaves that bad taste, that resistible experience. We want to be a church who's known for who we are for. That's what the church is all about, being known for who they are for. And even in the early 1st and 2nd centuries, this is what followers of Jesus did. The church was known as a light, even within communities, within cities like Rome, within Rome where babies, if you had a child, if you had a baby that was born within your family and you saw it as weak, it was deformed, if you just didn't want it, it was unwanted, you could just leave it outside. That was common practice, and it would just be taken by illness or just die. It was devastating. It's terrible. We look at that now and we know that that is so wrong. But it was followers of Jesus who not only changed the world in that time, but changed the law eventually. You see, followers of Jesus, they went to these homes and they were the ones who collected and adopted these babies. They took them on. And it wasn't until centuries later that Rome actually decided to change their law to say, like, oh, hey guys, like, this is wrong. Don't do this anymore. Don't go leaving unwanted babies outside. See, followers of Jesus have always been called to be lights to those around them, to be for people. There's a couple of ways that you can be for people around you and for the next gen. At Beyond, we have an incredible team that runs our Upstreet Kids Club that is for primary schoolers and families who want to engage in their own personal life to grow as a family, but also engage in their own faith journey. We have our Infinity Youth that runs on Friday nights at Grace Lutheran College, Caboolture. It's awesome, but we have an awesome team out there that give up their time generously and want to champion the next generation. There's 2 opportunities there. If that's something that you're like, hey, I think I could be part of that team in some way, I'd love to get more information. Check out our website, www.beyondchurch.com.au/irresistible. You'll find it in the comment section below. Or if you even want to look at what that looks like to give generously to that space, then we'd love to give you information through that link as well. But this is the thing, it's too important for us not to reclaim irresistible for our next generation. Because just like how the early church wanted to make it as easy and as accessible as possible, make the door as wide as possible for the next generations to come to access God, whilst Christianity can continue and church people can continue to add things and hold on to the old, we have an opportunity to actually embrace what the Christian faith looks like from the side of irresistible, to point people back to who Jesus is by living out a life that models who the person and the love of Jesus is. The faith of the next generation points back to reclaiming irresistible. We want to care, we want to love, and we want to be for the next gen. So my question for you today to ponder on and to think through is, what does reclaiming irresistible and what does the next gen mean to you? Well, thanks for joining us and enjoying some chicken nuggies with me today. We're super excited to have you along for our next episode, premiering every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. But if you enjoyed today, if you're looking forward to what next series conversation we're going to be jumping into, hit like, hit subscribe, jump into the comments and click on that link as well. There's heaps of ways to engage, but we can't wait to see you next time at Beyond at Home. Is that good, Pat?